Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming to the Stephen Lawrence Gallery to see this exhibition about men and to hear the artist talk relating to the exhibition. My name's David Waterworth. I'm the curator of the gallery, and we're really excited to have Seema come and curate this particular exhibition. I'm sure you'll agree it's turned out amazingly the way all the separate works or the separate exhibits work together really functions very well and makes for a very exciting overall exhibition. What we're going to do first of all is I'm going to ask each artist to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their practice, and then we're going to then follow up with looking at each exhibit in detail and ask them to talk about this particular body of work that they're showing here in more detail.
So when I was invited to do the show here, I knew that I wanted to show my work Lost in the Soot, which focuses on memory and loss. And as a result of that, I started questioning how else memory and loss can be photographed through our practices, which led me to think about the artists and the particular type of work that I wanted to be showing. I also wanted I wanted to attract a diverse audience. I wanted the audience that come in to the show to be able to relate to the work on a both personal and a collective level, and so therefore which led me to inviting Ansel, Philippa, Shaisa and Rayhan to show their work, and brings in a wider community than I think what a traditional space would. And I do believe that since the opening that we have drawn in people to the show that would not necessarily attend a gallery space and come see a particular exhibition, but more so now that the work that we are showing here, it allows people to be able to relate to it, it allows communities to be able to relate to it, whether it's touching on growing up in Peckham, or whether it's growing up in an area with a community developing around the East London Mosque, for example, or whether we are looking at memory in terms of loss, of whether it's possessions or personal loss. And that was what I wanted for the show, really, to be able to put together a show that a wide group of people would be able to relate to, and not just a smaller audience.
Thank you, Seema. And there was evidence of that in the last few days with your work, Anselm, where people who you photographed come in to see themselves and, oh, there's me. And so obviously it's a project which engages with the people that you know and related in your community around you.
Yeah. I mean, my name's Anselm. Thank you everybody for coming down today. I am a photographer, photography documentary. Recently completed my MA, and my project was the Horizon ongoing project. So what you see on the wall is kind of a small segment of a wider body of work. And the way the project kind of manifests, I kind of see it as two different elements. So I'm kind of exploring the memory of the area through the landscape and the built environment. And I'm really interested in how people can leave a mark on a space even if they're not in the space. So when I'm photographing the area, I'm really interested in those elements of what you see even though you can't see the people in it. And it's also kind of an expression of my own personal connection to the area. I've lived in Peckham my whole life, and I've seen how it's changed over time. And you know, I do remember a time when the perception of Peckham socially and in the media was wholly negative. So it's I'm interested in playing with the perception of how people see the area as well. And then the other side of it is the community. So where I have the portraits, you know, some people I know, most people that I encounter in the streets, that's why I tend to engage with the community and also ask questions in the wider Black community specifically about how they feel about how the area has changed over time, and kind of explore those thoughts and feelings and where they align with mine and where they differ. So I find it really interesting as well.
Yeah, thank you. And Philippa, your work explores the memory of very real events, but through fictional representations. And I wonder if you wanted to talk about that.
Yeah, so I'm Philippa. I'm studying MA in photography at Falmouth, and this is my work here. It's called Unqualified, and it's about feeling basically unqualified after my father died. And it's fictional in the sense that, so they're all self-portraits, but I'm not in them. So I don't know if they are technically self-portraits, but it was like a series which was very much phototherapy. And I felt really like I didn't know how to deal with grief. And so this project really helped me, I don't know, understand it and analyze it and be with it and kind of have peace with it. And so I created these self-portraits of as if they were me as the little girl, because that's how I felt. I felt like I didn't have the skills to deal with such big emotions, and I just felt like I had to kind of step in my father's shoes and almost take over kind of the patriarch of the family. But at the same time, I just wanted to curl up because my dad had died. Do you know what I mean? So it was this like conflict. That's why, like this one here, where she's driving the car, it's quite metaphorical, my work, what this series is. And I was exploring memory, so a lot of these, so there's one girl in there who's smoked a cigarette, which obviously what I did as a teenager, not obviously, but I did. And so, whereas these days kids, teenagers are vaping, so it's very much, memories from mine, but it's kind of, so they're created memories, and they're exhibited in these little, what are they called? Like light boxes? Slide viewers, thank you. Which I didn't realise, so my fellow artists, many of them hadn't seen one before, but it was, I was brought up with these slide viewers, and that was kind of my upbringing, and that's the relationship I had with my father. So everything's kind of tightly in sync with kind of memories with my father and stuff like that.
Yes, thank you for that. And Shaista, your work engages with the idea of collective memory in some way, and it is an intervention. And also, it's not what we traditionally would understand as photography, though in many ways it belongs in a photographic exhibition. Do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I have a very complicated relationship with photography. I think my natural reaction at the moment is not to work with still images. This project came about after, well, actually it was a couple of years ago, around this time of the year, Ramadan. I'd had a really spiritually uplifting month, and contemplating things to do with nature and the signs of God in nature, as we're told in the Quran. And I emerged on a spiritual high and came back to the real world, back to work. And I've been studying and researching Islamophobia, which I have done since 9/11, because of the very fractious circumstances that Muslims find themselves in ever since then, before then as well, but obviously heightened ever since. And so I came out of Ramadan with this spiritual high. I was like, I cannot read this stuff that I've been collecting. So I've been collecting from charity shops books, Islamophobic books, books filled with anti-Muslim hate. And I just looked at them and I was like, I don't think I can read these now. Because one of the points of Ramadan is also the softening of the heart. And I feel that kind of research actually in a way was hardening my heart. So I decided I can't read these books, and I was brought up thinking that, being taught that books are sacred, you don't throw books away, you respect them, knowledge is sacred. But I thought, well, I'm not going to read them, I'm certainly not going to give them to somebody else to read, and I'm not going to destroy them. What can I do that's productive? And I mentioned before that I have a complicated relationship with imagery, with photography specifically. In a previous life I worked as a photojournalist. And I moved away from that, and ever since for reasons to do with objectification of poverty and the way black and brown people are depicted in the development sector that I was working in. So to cut a very long story short, I decided to use this paper to conduct experiments in my practice. So trying things I'd never done before. So cyanotypes is one of the processes that I used, photographic process. I've done other experiments, and I'm trying still to use the paper that I have in these stack of books that I have at home to just try something new, and to connect with my faith and my spiritual practice at the same time. It's very connected with the work that I'm producing with this paper, while also experimenting with my practice.
Thank you. Thank you. And Rehan, you also turned your lens on the community, and what I found extraordinary as well is that the selection of works that you've selected to show here in the gallery. It's just a very small selection of a kind of archive of photographs you have of that community, and it's really interesting as well to see how that lens has a very particular frame into and the content of the pictures tells narratives other than maybe another photographer would tell of that very same community. So I'd be interested to hear about your approach there.
I mean, it's an archive of one particular community in Tower Hamlets. It didn't start off like that. It was an end of year college project. I was doing photography A-level, and I had to do 12 pictures on an interesting story, and I chose the East London Mosque, which is like that picture there. That's when I started. So it's got the London Muslim Centre and the Mariam Centre for Women and all sorts of other things happening there. But then it was just this domed mosque, very small, and the community was very small. There wasn't that many people. No one really knew what went on inside the mosque, and that was my initial project. What goes on behind those doors? And then it just grew and grew, and it went on for 10 years. The mosque kept growing. It's still growing. They've got another expansion happening now. And I got more and more interested in doing quite graphic images of particular things, and looking at them in quite a lot of detail. And I wanted to have the record of my community and my faith shot by me, rather than a photographer who wasn't from the community shooting my people in a way. I like the idea of me doing it. My connection to the mosque is my dad in the sort of late 70s and early 80s had his factory sort of opposite the mosque, and I actually watched the domes being fitted. So there was probably an early connection to it, and it just carried on. The project.
Are you still photographing it?
Yeah, not in black and white film. That's because it's too expensive. The mosque actually has a strong room, which is temperature controlled, moisture controlled. Everything is. It was put together with the help of the National Archives, so all the negatives are stored there, and which is quite nice for me. Others can also store their stuff there too.
Thank you, Rehan. I think it'd be really interesting further on in the discussion to pick up this idea of archive and memory. And Seema, do you want to talk a bit more, because you gave us sort of an introduction to the show, but would you like to talk a bit more about your...
Yes, so the work here on the left, on my left, is called Lost in the Soot. The work didn't come about like a traditional project would usually. I didn't spend months planning or researching. Unfortunately, we had a fluke accident in our home, and we had a fire. And I was traumatized, like most people would be after having a fire, and I wasn't quite sure how to deal with my grief. And around that time, I think I was out with Ansel one evening, and I said to him, I really want to photograph inside my home, and I really want to photograph myself inside my home, which is a separate project to what's being shown here. And I just felt, I think it was my only way of being able to deal with the trauma that I was experiencing. The sadness and the grief of losing my son's childhood was probably the biggest thing for me. As a mother or as a parent, we often hold on to all those little things like their first baby grows, their first drawing, and all of that was destroyed. And I found myself longing to want to be in that space, even though it was destroyed, because it would allow me to relive that life before it was completely removed from me. And so it was the process of dealing with an insurance company who, or a disaster recovery company as they call themselves, who came in to audit my home. So they were auditing all of our possessions, from the number of socks that we had, baby grows, and adding value to our possessions. And it was at that point I started questioning the value that we put on our possessions and the value that others would put on those possessions. So, for example, they might have valued the price of my father's hat, or late father's hat, at £7. But for me, that hat held far greater value. And in some ways, it's part of my identity that no longer existed. And that was what I was feeling with the loss of the entire home. And so when I actually started making this work, I thought that when I started making the work, it was actually the process of going from darkness back into light. So the 10-month journey of restoring the home, buying new possessions, refilling the home, taking my son back in for the first time. But what we actually see here at the moment is a very small collection of the images, I guess, or a particular edit, which is technically about 7 to 10 days after the fire itself. And I have displayed one of my wedding dresses, which we was able to recover. We're Asian, we have 5 events. Okay, it's just standard. And here, which is, as David calls it, the moon rock, is actually a cutout of my son's toy boxes. So we had, where the fire started, it was 8 toy boxes that melted down, and the insurance company could see that I was very distraught by the fact that Thomas no longer existed, or the Thomas tracks were melted, and so they cut me a piece of his toys to keep. And those are the things that we recovered from such a great loss. And over the years, I think my relationship with the work has changed, because, and I don't mean to sound patronising or undermining, but it's kind of very similar to grief, how over a period of time your relationship with that grief changes as well, or the way you feel about that particular grief or that loss. And I think that's what's happened here with this work, hence there's so many various edits of it. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. By the way, we should say that Thomas is the tank engine, not the child. The child's still very much well.
Yeah, sure, he's fine. He's 6 years old. It drives me mad.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, Thomas is the tank engine.
I think it's interesting that there's a strong narrative element in this display, and I think
Thomas features in there as well.
yeah, and I think in both yours and Philippa's, obviously there's this use of narrative to deal with trauma. So I wonder if you wanted to talk a little bit about that, maybe with you, Philippa, at first.
Yeah, there is. I mean, my project isn't even finished because I guess I got so far and it kind of did its job, if you like. And it really, it was the work was like a therapist, if you like. And I think art can be generally anyway, do you know what I mean? Like, so it kind of did its job and really helped me through the process of grief. And almost it's become like a bit like what you're saying, Seema, like after a certain amount of time, it's not, you know, my relationship with the work is very different. It was never going to be shown anywhere. Like it wasn't made to be shown, it was made, I don't know, for me.
It's quite interesting that their handheld, sort of very intimate relationship with the image, and both your and Seema's image are created by light shining through them.
Yeah,
which I think
and we didn't actually discuss that, did we? Yeah, that is interesting.
Did you feel some affinity with Seema's display and
Yeah, I mean, so I mean, obviously, Seema, you're the greatest curator, but I love the fact that they're opposite each other as well. And mine is what I call the white wall, because you don't actually know that anything's on there until you go and investigate. So it's quite interactive, and I think the intimacy is part of it as well, because it's grief, and I think it's universal as well. I think even if you haven't experienced grief, you could imagine what that potentially could be like. Do you know what I mean? So it's got this, you know, it's a personal project, but I think it's obviously a universal theme, and it's quite interesting how people deal with grief in very different ways and curate art and stuff.
And how about the narrative construction of your images? I mean, is there an order to the way they're being placed on the walls, and is that to be read as such?
There is in some respects, but I wanted people to be able to walk through the home, and I wanted people to be able to relate to the different spaces and the connections that we have with home. And I mean, we start with the first image. A lot of people don't quite recognise is actually a fire web, and those webs are formed when heat. This is very scientific. Heat travels into a cold space, and the webs. The complexity of the webs tends to dictate the complexity of the fire, and we was told that by the investigators that one of the guys had been working in the industry for 17 years, and it was the most complex form of soot damage he'd seen in a home. So for me, those fire webs that had formed throughout the home, and I thought, oh my God, it looks like I've got cobwebs everywhere. Were actually fire webs due to the level of disaster that was created. And I think for that reason I use that image to start, because it probably lends itself the best in terms of the disaster that it caused in our lives, I guess. And really, I just wanted people to be able to enter into the space. It does get slightly lighter as things are being removed. So when we go into the kitchen and the hallway, just so that we are able to experience that we did recover from it, and we do recover from grief in some ways. And whether we recover from it or whether we learn how to live with it and deal with it, it's two different things, but there is a change in that process, and I think that's what I wanted the images to show.
Yes, the final one is the empty room. So is that once everything has been removed?
Yeah, so it was after everything had been removed, after my entire home had been audited and put into black bin bags and disposed in the back of a van, and off it went to the tip, sort of thing. So that was after everything had been removed and the walls had been wiped down, for then the construction companies to come in and take away or remove back to the walls and restart rebuilding the stories of home. Yeah, so I guess it's probably the last stage before bringing back light into the home. So.
And Rehan, your archive of photographs contains many stories, I imagine. Where does stories and storytelling play a part in your work?
I shot so much. over 10 years. Even I became a bit lost in it. I was very young at the time. I was only 19 when I started on this project. No, actually, I was younger. In '94, I was younger than that. And it was a really nice time to just have one camera, 2 lenses, film, and just shoot whatever I saw. That was nice. I was talking to Azza earlier about the access. I think in the little statement it says about access. Shooting a Muslim community. Anyone who knows Tower Hamlets, if you're looking back 20 years, getting access to photograph inside a mosque would have been really, really difficult at that time. It was difficult. Even I couldn't get access initially. They refused, and I said it was for a college project. They said no, can't do it. People would be upset. And then they started their expansion project, and the dynamic changed. I guess they needed me a bit more than I needed them. So it kind of worked out okay, and then the relationship developed, and now they have film crews in there and photographers in there almost every Friday. But back then it was very difficult to actually move around the mosque with a camera and take pictures of quite intimate areas where people are washing, and be really up close, getting access to children's classes again. I didn't have DVS at the time or anything like that, and just go and do it. So it was.
Didn't even have email at that time.
94, I think email did exist, didn't it?
No,
Well, I didn't have a computer, but yeah.
you're the same age as me.
21. Yeah. What was the question again? Sorry.
Stories, lots of stories. I mean,
Yeah, there's so many.
narrative,
There's so many stories, right? I photographed. The community wanted male circumcision for Muslim boys. It's compulsory. So there was back rooms, converted them. Kids used to have the circumcision done, and then the community got together and said, no, why don't the NHS at the Royal London, why don't they offer it as a paid service? So I went along to the NHS and I photographed male circumcision. Sainsbury's, Muslim women serving non-halal meat in Sainsbury's. Sainsbury's was really nice. I said, yeah, go on, shoot it if you want. The helipad at the Royal London, that was in its early phases at that time, and they allowed me to sort of photograph that. The markets and how the mosque growing was changing the neighbourhood. Everything went halal food. The markets went from being 50-50 white stall holders and everyone else to pretty much everyone is now either Bangladeshi, Somali or Algerian in Whitechapel. It's a thriving market, it's brilliant, but it's only one type of person selling stuff there. So much changed with the mosque's expansion. There's so many stories you can shoot all day long.
And you look at them and each one seems to be a story.
There's an interesting one.
Yeah,
when I first exhibited that at Rich Mix, the white guy, his grandson kicked up a fuss, and Rich Mix phoned me up and they said, "Oh, someone's seen it," and it was the day of the launch, and they're very unhappy about the picture. They say it's their father or grandfather at the time. They say. I said, all right, I'll pop along and have a chat with him. And I said, oh, what's the problem? He goes, oh, that's my granddad. I said, what's the problem? And he goes, does he know you took the picture? I said, well, yeah, because I asked him. Anyway, I said, who's your dad? And he said, oh, so-and-so. I said, go and call your dad. And it turned out I knew who his dad was, so it was all right. So, and I spoke to his dad and I said, oh, I don't think your dad was upset about me taking a picture because I shot a whole roll of filming these two. He goes, no, because we've moved out the area. We're in Essex now, but he goes, I've just called my dad and I've taken a picture of it and sent it to him. He says he wants to come and see the exhibition and he misses the East End so much and all his neighbours, they're neighbours.
They look like they're neighbours.
And he just said, he missed the area and it's how it's changed when he does come back, but he still wants to move back, but he can't because he sold the house. And he
Now
can't,
he can't
now,
afford
now he
it.
can't afford it, yeah. So yeah, there's lots, so many different little stories within. I mean, Samantha Mumba, the pop star, the Irish pop star. There was a time in the East End where if you had, Kaiser's laughing because he knows if the billboards went up and there was a sort of a semi, not even nude, it's like a woman revealing a little bit. Yeah, arms even, someone would go along and spray paint me or hijabify them like they've done there. So they put the little hijab across them and stuff. And it must have been a little group of, I'd say, boys who went around doing this, but it was quite funny. I found it really funny anyway. They had I think it was Wonder Bra used to do a lot of adverts in the late 90s, but they never did one in Whitechapel. I was waiting.
Really?
I really was waiting for it.
Perhaps sensibly.
Yeah. But it never happened. So the only one I could do was the Samantha Mumba one.
And someone was wondering if we could extend that and talk about people telling their story through your photograph and how that works.
Or like people in the community.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think I'm still working through the project, and I'm still, I'll be working on it this year. And I just walk around the area, and I'm most of the time stopping people, just explaining what I'm doing, explaining my perspective and where I'm coming from, and seeing if there's any interest in the portrait being made. And oftentimes, I'm making the portrait there and then, and then offering to have a conversation at a later date, or if they have time there and then. And yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I think something that I found really interesting about the dynamic within the Black community in Peckham and the people I've been speaking to is how the opinions of the change that they perceive in the area or the feelings that come from that change differ depending on the age of the person that I speak to. So I've spoken to older people who perhaps don't feel as threatened by it because, older members of the Black community who perhaps came here by the Windrush generation, way back in the 50s, or the economic migrants from West Africa who came here, they often have a kind of idealized home which isn't on the continent, isn't on the UK, and so they don't have that same kind of connection. Whereas younger people, myself, I'm a millennial, I was born in the UK, there's a lot more, there's a more visceral reaction to seeing your neighborhood and your area change around you, in perhaps ways that don't particularly or maybe don't accommodate you. So that's really interesting. But I kind of feel that it's mostly positive, in terms of the connection to the area and the feeling of community in the area, which has been nice. And it does. I find the conversations myself quite enriching. So I'm looking forward to going out this year and having more conversations and seeing what I find. I find that quite interesting. So
It's been great to have people who are in your photograph coming in to see the show.
Yeah,
well.
I mean, that's rewarding for myself anyway. I really enjoy portraits. I love making portraits, but I'm not particularly one who enjoys being in front of the camera. So whenever somebody agrees to have a portrait made of them, I take it as a great privilege. And so, we live in a very digitized environment. We've got AI imagery now, so print photography is almost archaic in a way. And so it's nice that people can have their portrait made. And, in the moment, you don't really know what's going to happen, whether you're ever going to see it again. And then you might see it on Instagram, or, but that's not the same as coming in person, seeing a print and appreciating it, particularly within the context of the area. So seeing pictures of the area in Peckham and being in the community and seeing yourself in that, I think that's nice to see that reaction from people. So,
You shoot a film?
yes. Yeah. So
Did your mum convince it?
Yeah.
I don't think my mum has come in yet, but she will be at some point.
She's in one
But
of,
she
not
is
just
in-
generally has your mum come, she is
But she
in one
is
of the
in one of the
pictures.
pictures. Yeah, she's
And Shasta, on the issue of narrative and the idea of narrative, and obviously you're sort of working in contradiction to the narrative or intervening with the narrative. And do you want to talk a bit about that process? And,
Yeah, I think one of the conversations we had about the layout of my work was the page numbers and how I've done different experiments at different times, and I've just been ripping out pages randomly. So it's kind of anti-narrative in that even the pages, the way that they're laid out and what I've done with them is in like complete wrong order. I think for me, we've talked a bit about kind of healing. I think there's definitely a thread of healing in the work, kind of taking a step back and thinking about, for example, you know, the post 9/11 context for Muslims, where so many Muslims have not really been able to process how, as a collective, I would say we have been targeted and penalised and punished for something that really isn't representative of our communities. And I think that it's only now, even with myself, I'm stepping back and thinking there's a lot of healing that needs to be done, and I recognise that in myself, but also on a larger level, that there needs to be that collective healing as well, in the space to process what's happened since then. But it's a kind of double layer, because also it's highly connected to my own religious practice as well, because also the project emanated from that spiritual high in Ramadan. And so, you know, any experiments that I'm conducting, they are very much related to some sort of religious practice as well, whether it's contemplative or there's a lot of natural elements in it, nature, going back to nature, because going back to the Islamic tradition, going back to nature is one of the biggest signs of creation and being at one with creation. So it's kind of a double kind of layered thing there. There's that healing element, but there's also going back to personal, private, religious practice, which again, it's so uncool to be religious now, or to say that you practice a religion, or that you find peace and comfort and you love your religious practice. So I'm kind of almost embracing that element and enjoying it.
Thank you. Can I just turn things, the subject now to the issue of archives and the relationship between the subject of this exhibition, which is around memory and loss, and the idea of the archive, because obviously photography has long had this very strong conceptual relationship with the idea of the archive, and we've already talked about archive as well in relation to Graham's practice particularly. But Shaista, as well, in your practice, I guess you're again engaging with an archive of material, and so you're working within the archive as well as working against these particular narratives.
I kind of like to call it speaking back, and that's kind of what my wider practice. So this is one strand of my practice, and my PhD research also deals with existing archives, usually of images, and using them to speak back. And this work is also similar to that. So I feel like if we're linking it to archive generally, I would say it's disrupting the archive that does exist, perhaps.
Yeah. And in terms of your work, Fima, you talked about when the Lost Justice went through and they listed all the lost items in a way, and these photographs have a connection to that in some way. So, how does that kind of listed idea of a house full of stuff and these relate, the kind of archival concept of a whole series of memories that have now just become ghosts?
So the archiving process, as you say, started with the auditing that happened through insurance companies of auditing our possessions, and I think I guess I took that one step further with photographing those possessions, which then became, I guess, an archival memory of the belongings that once existed, or things that were a part of our identity. I'm not fully sure, to be honest. I've not really thought of it in that sort of respect. Obviously, it's an archive of my memory and identity, but I
And
became
also-
so obsessed with freezing that space for myself, and my son had never actually seen those images nor realised what happened to the house until about 3 weeks ago, when he was like, "Mummy, is that our home?"
Wow.
So I guess in some ways it's an archive for him to look back at. To as he's older now, he'll be able to understand it. At the time, he was too young to understand or to even be explained to. But and now he questions it. And I guess you're right. That by documenting that home and though keeping or restoring those possessions, they become archives that he'll be able to reflect back on, or we would be able to reflect back on as a family, and to be able to look back and understand that point in our life.
Mm.
So,
Yeah. I had a friend whose house burnt down when he was in his early teens, and so he had nothing from his childhood, and I guess in a way, what you've done here is you've replaced that thing with something else,
Yeah.
which is a record of the event.
yeah. I mean, it's funny you say that because Yashua asked me the other day if I had the scan of him as a baby when he was in my tummy, and I froze for a moment because I didn't know if I did have that anymore. But I had a picture of the picture, and I guess that was the archive that I was able to give to him. But I then said to him, I'll have to go into the loft and look through the restored boxes to see if I have a scan of you, But yeah, so I guess in some respects that's what I was doing. I guess I was creating without even realising an archive for him to then be able to look back at his childhood that no longer existed.
Yes, yeah. I guess for you, I mean that record is a record of events that, well, they kind of happened, but you obviously had that childhood, but
Well,
you recreated it.
exactly. So I think when a family member dies, the first thing you do is look at the family archive, the family albums. They come out, and I don't know. I mean, I did a lot of kind of research on it, and what's in your family album, is that really the memories that you remember, or sometimes you don't even remember it and it's the photo that triggers it, or sometimes that looks like a really happy picture but you remember 2 seconds later it's fucking carnage and everyone's like having a throat. Do you know what I mean? And so I guess I've kind of recreated the family, not necessarily the family album, but I guess I've recreated the archive in terms of bits that have helped me deal with grief, although I mean, not all of them are here, but some of them are quite ugly, do you know what I mean? And quite disturbing, I guess, because like everyone's family has, dark secrets, and it's not all pretty like, but the family album kind of is. So it's kind of going against that kind of traditional archive of what you keep, and creating mine, which, as I said, wasn't for show, but it was a form of therapy to kind of get the skeletons out of the closet and create my own archive.
And I guess that we look at these memories through some sort of instrument is a bit like it gives us almost a kind of scientific relationship to that history, like we're looking at things through a microscope or
That's
something
true.
like that.
Yeah,
So
that's great. I'll write that down. I hadn't thought, because I've never shown it. So
it's a really intriguing way to relate to somebody
Yeah.
else's memories and what's in
inside the like just going a bit deeper.
And I guess the past has a kind of geography to it, and it's sort of interesting to think about the way you kind of map out geography of your past through the photographs. And Ansel, you're dealing with a physical geography of space and place, and people who know the area will be able can recognise things very easily.
Yeah. I think when thinking about archive and by extension memory, it's a really distinct element it's a really distinct element of what makes us human. It's how we preserve and how we document something. If it's a family album, or even if it's a burnt down house, it's something that a family member can connect and really pinpoint part of their identity to. And so when thinking about photographing a space, and I mean, with the environments I am photographing, there's a very kind of curated element in the fact that I'm referencing very specific things, right? So I'm really interested in how, like I mentioned before, perception, for example. I'm aware of a wider perception of Peckham that has existed, across the timeline of my time, of the time that I've lived there, negative and perhaps positive in some ways. And I'm interested in how the way I photograph the area can shift that perception, for example. So what does it say about an area that might have been deemed as the ghetto if it's photographed in beautiful sunlight in these pictures, right? What are the layers in photographing palm trees in an area like that? What are the questions that arise from what could be considered exotic in that space? So I'm really interested in dealing with all these personal elements when I'm photographing that space. But conversely, when thinking about archive, I think it's really important to center myself in a time and place, like thinking about what Rayhan said recently. With the guy who's moved to Essex, he wants to go back, but we can't afford to go back. So I think it's really important to place myself in Peckham in the here and now, and also the Black community as well in the here and now of Peckham. And so, in a sense, I'm kind of making an archive or making a statement that these people were here in the space. And that's why it's important that, the people that I do photograph either live in Peckham at the time that I photographed them, or have lived in Peckham for a long period of time, or spend a lot of time in the area. Because I do hope that in the future, when the work is looked back on, it might say something about how that space has changed in that time. So,
I think there's a very formal pared down content to your photographs. I mean, so the photographs formally have very similar construction one from another, and that's quite interesting when thinking about making a record of a space that somehow that the framing is always the same even if the subjects are different.
yeah, it's interesting. It's difficult because it's a work in progress, and because the selection on display in the Stephen Lawrence Gallery is a very select selection of a wide body of work that is still ongoing. It's interesting to kind of think about how, I've obviously picked those pictures to display on the wall, and there is a formality to the way those pictures represent and relate to one another. But there are other ways to kind of express the space and the people, and that might change, and that can flip the way you might look at the area, or the way you might look at the formality of the images I put together. I think, in my experience as a photographer, I think something that I'm really interested in is how sequencing can really shift and change narratives and change the way we perceive a particular place or perceive a body of work, right? So archive, as a archive, it acts in a different way, but if as a body of work, you can manipulate that and tell different narratives and different stories with the way you place stuff. So it's hard to kind of like nail down a particular formality when I know the body of work is still ongoing, but I do appreciate that is there, that element is there now.
Yeah, I mean, Alan Sekula says the archive, talks of the archive as a territory of images, and it talks about the kind of contested narratives that can be traced through that territory. And I mean, talking in particular about, photographic archives, which are there to serve a number of different audiences. And Rayhan, I'm sort of interested because you've got the archive there, haven't you? This is an archive of a community, and we've talked about the stories. And is it something you see in a kind of geographical sense, it's about a geographical area, but does it have, is it like a territory that you can map out? with all
I think
sorts of-
archives are rubbish.
No,
I'll tell you why.
No,
why. Okay, right. So since sort of like Black Lives Matter happened,
Yeah.
all the archives have been clamoring over themselves to sort of say, oh, let's do scanning sessions of communities and let's get pictures of the 90s of, say, Asian communities. Bring your pictures in, we'll scan them for you, and give you a scan of your picture, and we'll add to our archive, and then we'll control your history. Almost, I'll throw it out there, probably 90% of people working in archives, museums and galleries are white, middle class, and then they're going to control my archive. Someone asked me to deposit this archive into theirs and say, we'll look after it. And I said, the mosque has its own archive. I don't need you. And their answer was like, yeah, but most people come to us to look at it, they look at the work. And I said, I don't need most people. I've got my own community and they can look at it. And if anyone else wants to come and look at it, they can. So I think it's really important for marginalised communities to document their own communities, because only they can do it in an accurate way and in a fair way. I think what I did was fair. I don't think I made it all rosy and it's all nice. I think I did a fairly balanced document of a particular time, of a particular community. And I think it's probably not so important now, but maybe in 20, 30 years' time, they're probably quite important then.
I think it is important.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, but it's not.
Think about your kids. When you show them, you tell the story of how the area's developed, how things have changed,
Yeah.
the connection that you had with the physical space because of the factory across the road, and you saw the dome being installed.
Yeah.
So it's important, even as part of your own history here growing up. And also, I mean, what you're talking about is something that I'm quite interested in as well, is making work for our own communities, which historically has just not been a thing. So it's what you're doing is really important, but the longer term. So it needs to continue, but it's a good starting point.
It's already it's already a piece of history.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying it'll be more important later on. I think that, I mean, I look back in the 94 shots and you can see cars that you don't see anymore, which is really interesting.
I think from an aesthetic point of view, I think photography has a unique relationship with the temporal, where as time continues and shifts, that nostalgic effect is really strong. But I think to what Rayhan is saying, the importance of documenting our own communities is extremely important and pertinent. I mean, if you look at like memory work and telling our own stories and telling the truth as well. If you look at in the United States, where there's, and even in the UK with Kemi Badenoch and all the conservatives trying to ban critical race theory, for example, that's happening now. And it's like we're talking about the critical ways we engage with racism or marginalized communities or historic horrors, right? So that work is important right now. And visually, the way we tell those stories, I agree with Rayhan, they'll become even more important in the future. But it's important that we're telling those stories, that there are a variety of voices within those demographics telling those stories. So Asian women, Black women, queer people. It's I think all of that is important, but it's important right now.
So, yeah, absolutely. Totally. I think this is a good point maybe to widen the discussion to questions from the audience. Yes.
Should I start? So you said your work speaks back to Islamophobia text, and I don't know if you understand what you're talking about. And in my mind, it's a part of a tradition of reclaiming the racist language for the oppressed, and it's a sort of like liberating the active. Are there any artists or thinkers who were influenced by why you created?
Oh wow. Not specifically in the physical creation of a cyanotype, but ideologically, one of the things I've been really enjoying is artists making work about Black joy, for example, and people not wanting to engage with that kind of traumatic imagery. Black feminist thinkers who have paved the way for so many of us. So in terms of the thought process behind it and not wanting to expose myself, my heart, and to kind of almost perpetuate those texts as they are, those sorts of people have kind of set that tone in the direction I wanted to go in.
Talk to you again, Jennifer, about just the sort of just intrigued as to how big is that section of the whole work?
Yeah, I mean,
Is it enormous or?
yeah, it's an ongoing project. It's going to be ongoing forever because I have stacks of Islamophobic books that I've got loads of experiments to do. We'll see how we go. We'll see if I run out of steam. But as I mentioned that I was a self-trained photojournalist, so anything that I'm doing now, as I expand to a wider visual arts practice, it's all me trying things. I've not been taught how to do anything. So the possibilities are endless. But some of the other stuff that I've been doing is paper folding. I'm interested in sculptural work, so I've been making little lanterns with light, so almost light shining through. I've used geometric experiments, so going back to kind of traditional Islamic arts, which are geometric in nature, and they all hark back to the oneness of God and the way that the calculate. Anyway, I won't bore you with the details because I'm not trained either. So there's so many different things I'm trying. I have a residency in Cambridge at the moment as well, where I'm trying printmaking. As much as I kind of not necessarily making photographic images per se at the moment, I have done a test print on the paper as well. So watch this space, who knows? So yeah, possibilities are endless, and I could go on and on and on forever, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a question for everyone. First of all, thank you. This is a very fascinating conversation. It's like really beautiful to see all the resonances between the work. And so we were really struck by, obviously, the way you're all kind of troubling the archive as this like static, kind of disembodied thing. And the real sense of embodiment and like personal feelings of emotion and belonging in all of the work. And I also think sometimes photography is kind of dismissed as an unembodied practice when actually the photographer is always taking pictures, making pictures. So I'd love to hear you all talk about your own kind of like the physical practice of making these work.
I mentioned like photography having kind of like a unique relationship to the temporal and having like a document of time and you know, having a record of that. And I photograph, I use analog cameras to make most of my personal work, and so that involves the physical negative and you know, eventually printing and maybe being in a dark room, but I haven't done much of that yet. But conversely, another element of the work that I'm doing that I enjoy comes not really in the photo making at all. So it's kind of with engaging in the community. So it's not really anything to do with photography. And I find that really interesting and challenging to myself, you know, like, so what does it mean to be of the community? What does it mean to engage with the community? And in West African culture, a lot of the way that we share stories and a lot of the way that we share information is orally. So having conversations is a natural part of that. So recording that element is another facet of kind of like embodying the archive making. So I'd say in that respect, that's where it relates to me. But I'll open it up to the rest of my.
Well, I guess the way, it's a really interesting question. So I work digitally and I work very fast usually, and because I really wanted to slow down because of the subject matter of this project, a friend bought me actually a lens which was just for very old film cameras, so you had to like manually focus it, and I had to have a tripod. So like I kind of like on purpose made everything to like slow me down and to stop. And I designed the photos, which I work in portraiture normally and documentary kind of. So I planned them, I planned outfits, I planned colour, a lot of the time, I don't know, like with grief, that you do go back to nature and colour, and you notice, you know, small bits of colour, and so I really wanted to design, you know, these photographs with colour in mind. And I have actually totally forgotten what the question was. Sorry.
You were answering it.
Oh, am I? Fine. I guess it was more about
What you did.
process. Yeah. So I guess that was kind of my experience of it, which I've never done before either. So yeah. Sorry, your turn. Don't nod.
No, I'll move on because I've chatted for ages.
Okay, fine. Yeah.
Physicality, taking pictures.
You should digitally now.
Yeah, I would go back to film. Just now. I don't want to go back to. I spent about 12, 13 years shooting film, and I used to process at the back of my car. I did a lot of press work, so I used to process the film in the back of my car and then take the film to the papers, and they would then scan it on one of the Epson scanners, and then the pictures would appear to the next day. So I don't want to go back to film ever again. It's really nice to actually work in the darkroom. It's really nice to I don't want to go back. Digital is nice. It's good. It's clean. It doesn't smell.
A picture like that you'd have to walk about quite a lot, wouldn't you?
Yeah. So what Ansela was saying was very similar. I don't really enjoy taking pictures. You get a lot of abuse. The type of work that I do, you get a lot of abuse. Why are you taking pictures? What's important about taking pictures of the shoes and the mask? Why are you showing that you haven't got enough money to buy nice shoes? Those sort of questions will always come up and stuff like that. So taking pictures, I'm not really too excited by it. But when I started that, I was really young, I was still in my teens, and it was really nice to sort of do something locally and grow up and learn at the same time about my faith and how to communicate with people of different ages at different times of the day. The mosque is really weird in the sense that you've got older people at certain time and you've got younger people at different times. So it's really interesting to be able to sort of move between generations and how you have to be very slow and patient with the older generation, and then very quick with the young, because they're not going to hang around. So I think I did a lot of growing up in those 10 years. And when I think back about memory, when we spoke at the radio about this project, and it was pretty, wasn't it? Bad memory. What's really nice is that for me, this time is never going to come back. Having just one camera, one lens, and walking around, having that freedom to just walk around all the time and just take pictures. I don't think I've got the time to be able to do that again. And just stop off and talk to people in the street and in shops, and that's the real enjoyment, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's getting to know people in your community and getting their trust, and then going back later on and taking pictures of them. You know, I think it's really a nice, beautiful way to work. I know Seb's sitting here, and she's kind of commissioned me for a project that we're working on. But I've spent it's just a 2-year project, and I haven't taken any pictures yet. I don't think, not properly. I've spent the whole year talking to people. It's been really quite nice.
That's the way it should be, though.
It is, yeah, it is the way it should be. That's because you've got good people like Seb, you know, commissioning. Yeah, I think if you can just slow down a bit and get to know people a bit better and understand, for the type of work that I do anyway, which is documentary work, I think it's really important. And it's the nice thing about the work that I do is just getting to know people, I think.
I wonder how much of the pushback that you get when you're shooting in the mosque is to do with the context that Muslims are living in, not wanting to be photographed.
Not anymore. Last year during Ramadan, I shot East London Mosque. I did the whole project again in 30 days, but in colour, digital, and didn't get any abuse, nothing. Everyone was like, yeah, sure, take pictures of me. Even the older generation were posing for pictures. But
also the relationship people have with selfies and the camera.
Yeah,
like,
it's
that
all
wasn't
changed.
there
No,
before.
it
Yeah,
wasn't there. It wasn't there. So
Just one of the things that I did want to touch on about whilst making the work, some of the challenges was actually light. The challenges of having lights in that space in the home. It was pitch black, floor to ceiling. So to try and even get the camera to focus, to be able to find a focus point, was pretty difficult. And he's going to hate me for saying this, but Gaurav over there, who's actually photographing, he was there with a battery-operated light because we had no electricity in the house. And it was an LED panel, and we literally had to make light in that space. But it was so pitch black that any form of light was being sucked in. And because it was the winter months, we were losing daylight, and I wasn't supposed to be in there for more than 10 minutes at a time, only for emergency purposes. But we had been in there for 4 hours.
Oh my God.
And our lungs were hurting, and I was crying, and I was sitting in my bed, and it was like, don't get into your bed, you're going to make yourself worse. But it was horrific. But we had to try and find light, and we was trying to open windows, but the windows were covered in soot. So I think that was one of the biggest challenges of even being able to capture that archive, I guess. The fact that I had no access to light, and I was trying to make light in such a dark space. And I just, when you asked that question, I instantly remembered that particular challenge. And then, those battery-operated LED panels that only last for 15 minutes and then it would die. And I remember going to one of the neighbours and saying, can we charge the battery, please? But it was making that work wasn't a traditional way of making work. Yes, it was being forced into, I wasn't forced into making the work, but it was a situation that I never planned for. And I think that was the challenge of making the work, because I didn't really know what it was that I was photographing. I just knew I wanted to photograph. And I think it was because it's the only thing that I understand in some ways. And so I just channeled my energy to making some pictures about the experience.
tell them about how it started. That health and safety tip.
Yeah, no, because that's the story.
Okay, it's all about stories. So November is actually apparently sunlight is the strongest in November. So put your blinds down in November, everyone. So the sunlight travelled in through the living room window, and it went through the fish tank, which then caused it to reflect and refract, is the scientific term, and then caused us a heat spot to cause a fire to start on my son's toy boxes. And that is basically how the fire began. And I knew that happened because I saw it happen around August when I saw a car and the tyre on the car was melted. And I was like, and the only reason I was able to relate to that is from Toy Story. So Sid and the magnifying glass. Again, Sid is a character from Toy Story, not my child. And we moved the position of the fish tank, but obviously as the year goes by, the sun position changes, and that's how the fire started. No, the fish didn't survive, before anyone asks. We often get that. Did the fish survive? Andrew didn't make it, unfortunately.
So many, it's just a really strong relationship with the whole project in Glasgow. So you were saying that the light coming through, you had to, because I just presumed it was sunlight.
No.
You just think, oh, it must have been a window over there. The fact that you have to light it.
Yeah.
You can't take a photograph without light.
No.
You really need.
But
And then you put them in light.
yes. When Rayhan saw one of the images, he was like, why is there so much magenta? I was like, be quiet, will you? It was hard enough to get light. Like, let's not talk about that now. I'll colour balance that digitally. But so I mean, that we do get lighter as things have been moved out, as the walls have been wiped down. You are able to see sunlight. But I mean, again, that was at 11 o'clock in the day. If it had got to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, as it starts to get darker, it was just pitch black.
Also, another observation sorry if I missed in the beginning, but seeing this is the first of the communication one.
Yeah.
I want to know the process, like how the artist, how you work with them.
Okay. So I mentioned earlier, and that's not to point out that you were late. Thank you very much for coming though. I was saying earlier that I knew that I wanted to show this particular piece of work. It hadn't been shown. Maybe because I've never quite concluded it. I didn't quite know how to show the work. It was created as a journey over a 10-month period, going from darkness into light. And so when David very kindly offered me the opportunity to show work here, I decided that it fit very well that I would be showing Lost in Soot. And then the running theme for me for that piece of work is memory, and I wanted to select artists' work that reflected memory, but memory in a collective and a personal way. So not just personal memory, but also memory that a wider, diverse community could relate to, and hence, you know, Anselm's project about. I mean, I don't mean specifically Black community in Peckham, but because it is a community that you are yourself associated with, it draws in a Black community which might not necessarily have. Gallery might not have necessarily attracted that community unless there is work there that people are able to relate to. Same with Rayhan's work looking at Muslim communities. And I feel really chuffed that we have drawn in such a wide audience. And that's what it's about. I mean, last year I showed some work at the Whitechapel, and I had family members who felt that they couldn't walk into a big gallery because they didn't know how to dress, or, you know, are they able to walk into the space, or are they able to attend? And really, because I think we take for granted the fact that we view so much work, we go to galleries and openings and exhibitions, but we don't realise there is still a massive community of people who feel underrepresented or don't feel that they're able to engage with that work because maybe it doesn't speak to them. And that is the one thing that I wanted this show to, I guess, challenge and show that that's not necessarily true, that, you know, you can, there is a representation for everyone. We can see it clearly here, you know. We've made this work, I've made this work for my son, myself, but, you know, these guys have made the work for either themselves or a wider community, and a community that might not necessarily feel like they've been represented before. So, I think hopefully that answers your question. So,
Can I just come back?
yes,
As well, I think the galleries.
you're allowed.
I think galleries need, if they want to engage with, I'm just going to speak from a Muslim perspective actually. So if they want to engage with Muslim communities, then they need to understand those communities. You've got, say, the Whitechapel. They're a massive art gallery in Tower Hamlets, and what do they actually do to engage with the community other than do a school project and stick it in the community room? And I think that they need to really understand their local communities if they really want to engage, because they use them in the funding applications to say that we engage with local communities, but then they do very little. They do very little to actually really engage. And if they just considered prayer times, for example, and thought, or Eid or Ramadan, and not doing a show during Ramadan. And,
No, you iftar.
I know.
Okay.
So Seema's really good. She organised
There you
iftar. I know. I saw it.
Not yet. Sorry.
And consider the people that they're trying to engage and attract and ask to sort of come into the doors of Whitechapel. When I did this at Rich Mix is not really an art gallery. I got a whole load of old people from the mosque to come down and young people, and none of them had really been to an art gallery before. And one of the old men came up to me and said, right, so what do we do here? I was like, what do you mean? And he said, well, what do we do? We're here now. I said, well, just take a look at the pictures and grab a samosa and get some, get a drink and walk around. He goes, is that all we're meant to do? I said, that's what this is your project. Is you're in the pictures, just walk around and see, have a chat. I said, go and talk to some white people, tell them what you do. And they did, which was good. But they don't actually know what to do when they go to a gallery. And so when you see the doors of Whitechapel open, and it's something you walk past from Moorgate East Station, but you never really go into for a certain section of the community, not everyone. And I think larger institutions need to do a lot more work, not just in commissioning new work, but actually just engaging with their communities to sort of come and look. It doesn't have to be an artist of colour or anything like that. It can be just what they're showing now, but engage with the communities in a meaningful way, not just a tick box
I
boring
think
exercise.
community projects generally are, though, it is a tick box. They're quite,
Something they have to do for funding
they
purposes.
have to
That's
do
it.
for funding, but some of them can get quite a lot of funding for, but it's almost like not executed as well as it absolutely could be, or it's a small bit on the side. It's not. There's no longevity for it.
Chisenhall did a brilliant piece of work with an artist, and they engaged with the community really well. They really engaged. They got out, met youth workers, and got young people in, and spoke to mums groups and stuff. And then they did the opening night after party in a pub in Tower Hamlets, it doesn't kind of make sense that you've done all this work and you've done really well, and then you spoilt it, and no one turned up from the community. Obviously, it was heaving, but no one locally from the Muslim community turned up.
I want to get a few last questions in from the audience. We've got a question there.
I was just thinking about the outside. How's it been like to I see what you said about making light out of nothing, something like that. If you guys have had any difficulty in trying to capture the message you're trying to portray, or has it been like, I just shoot, then this is like, I'm just stopping the moment right this second, or has there been like any other difficulties you guys have overcome to get that message across?
Yeah, shitloads. Like so many, even now it's like, yeah, loads. I don't know, like especially for my project anyway, because I was creating, I don't know, like an emotion over grief, like you're like photographing the invisible. So, there's other parts of the project. I ended up dressing up as my father, and I had this beard, which I bloody loved actually. I did some it really suited me, didn't it? And did some self-portraits with that, and those I've decided, just because I'm only showing a selection, went in here. But yeah, just really experimenting. I still unclear. It's not a complete finished body of work. So yeah, like the journey, I think is really intense, confusing, light bulb moments, amazing, blah, blah, blah.
I think that goes back to the earlier question about very different practices people have as well, and so that if you're setting out to make a series of work or a particular work that's a particular body of work, which isn't what you might usually do, then suddenly you have new...
Yeah, and it depends. So that was definitely, therapy, whereas I'm working on a body of work now called Girlhood, which is very much, I'm investigating and looking at facts and figures and stuff like that. So I guess it depends on what you're shooting.
People want to put you in a box. They want to know, are you a photographer? What kind of work do you do? What do you make? And actually, even ask my husband, he'll be like, what is it that you do again? And it's really hard to categorize what I do and to explain what's behind it. And I'm actually at the point now where I'm actually fine with that, because I'm developing and researching and figuring out what it is that I'm interested in and finding different ways of expressing that. And sometimes it's going to be, pressing flowers. Other times it's going to be heading Islamophobic books, researching. So yeah, I'm quite happy to.
What do you call yourself?
I say photographer and visual artist because people want to know exactly what it is that you do. So I do say that because I guess to an extent I am a performance too. But yeah, that's actually a challenge for me to explain. And even like in presenting this work, it's the penny only dropped when I started sharing some things on Instagram where lots of messages were coming through saying, oh my God, that's really interesting and amazing. But it's once you start telling the story behind it, it doesn't matter what the form is, that is what then starts to resonate. So the challenge is to stay out of the box actually, because I think that in a way keeps you evolving, hopefully.
I like that, the challenges stay out of the box.
I'm kind of conscious that we're coming very close to the end of our time, and some of you may want an opportunity to quickly see the exhibition before we close tonight. Has anyone got is there any last pressing questions that people have felt that just need answering? Because your chance is now. Yes?
So you talked earlier about controlling your own history, and I think that seems to be quite a central part of kind of memory-related theme that went through. And it seems to me controlling our own history is about representation. And when you create pieces of art, you put them into a space to share with people, you leave that open to interpretation. So you let go of some control. And I just wondered how that feels as artists to work so much on what you're creating on your terms and then to share it into a world as an active representation, but then to lose some of the control? Or do you feel that you're holding control because you've made a statement of what matters to you or what you captured? I don't know if any of you've got a view on that.
Well, for me, for all of us actually, this is only a selection of our work. So already, by showing, you were talking about sequencing earlier, by just showing a selection, you've already lost control of and I think if you're showing work, I'm not in control of what anyone thinks of my work or what anyone takes away from my work. But as long as I feel comfortable with the work and I can talk about it, which I can now, I couldn't when I was making it because it was all a mess. But now I can articulate it and I can put it in context. And then whatever someone else takes, because if you didn't know that, they look like really pretty, colourful, nice pictures of girls. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I'm quite excited by people having completely whatever they think of it.
So normally when I go into an exhibition space like this, I wouldn't have the privilege of hearing you talk about and share your work. So it's really interesting now to go and look at the work with that context.
I think that's a great point to end on as well. So thank you very much to the artists for their presentation this evening, and thank you to you all for coming. It's been a wonderful discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you.